Harold, a 72-year-old widower, lives alone in a suburban Ohio home after the death of his wife 2 years ago. His 45-year-old daughter, Sarah, visits him regularly, seemingly concerned about his health. During one of these visits, Harold notices that Sarah discreetly swaps his glass of water for another identical one. Intrigued, he pretends to drink from the new glass, but secretly watches his daughter consume the liquid from the original one. When Sarah has an unexpected reaction, Harold uncovers a shocking family conspiracy that forces him to confront painful truths about trust, family, and the value of his own life. A story about family betrayal, the fight for dignity in old age, and the discovery that sometimes those we love the most are capable of the darkest acts. The ice cubes clinked against the glass as I set it down on the kitchen counter, the same sound that had echoed through this house for 47 years of marriage. 2 years since Margaret passed, and I still made 2 glasses of water every morning out of habit. Old routines die hard, especially when you're 72 and your bones creak louder than the floorboards. Sarah was running late again. She always called ahead when she was coming over, every Tuesday and Friday like clockwork since the funeral. "Just checking on you, Dad," she'd say, though I suspected it was more about checking my bank statements and pill bottles than my well-being. Not that I blamed her entirely. I knew I wasn't the easiest man to live with, and Margaret had been the buffer between my stubborn nature and the rest of the world. The doorbell rang at exactly 10:30. Sarah had her own key, but she insisted on ringing the bell first. "It's your house, Dad. I want to respect your space." Respectful. That was Sarah. Always had been, even as a child. Never caused us trouble like her brother Danny, who was somewhere in California last I heard, chasing dreams that seemed to change with the seasons. "Coming, sweetheart," I called out, though my voice wasn't what it used to be. The emphysema was getting worse despite what I told Dr. Peterson at my last appointment. The lie came easier than admitting that some nights I couldn't catch my breath, that sometimes I'd wake up gasping like a fish pulled from water. Sarah stood on the porch in her navy business suit, briefcase in one hand, a grocery bag in the other. Her brown hair was pulled back in that tight bun she always wore for work, something corporate. I never quite understood what she did with numbers and computers all day. She looked tired, more tired than usual. "Hi, Dad." She kissed my cheek as she passed, the familiar scent of her perfume mixing with the autumn air. "How are you feeling today?" "Same as yesterday, same as I'll feel tomorrow," I replied, closing the door behind her. "You know me, Sarah, consistent as sunrise." She set the grocery bag on the counter and began unpacking items I didn't need. Fancy crackers, expensive cheese, those organic vegetables that tasted like water. Sarah had money now, more than Margaret and I ever had, and she seemed determined to spend it on me whether I wanted her to or not. "I brought some of those herbal teas you like," she said, holding up a box with foreign words on it. "The ones that help you sleep." I didn't remember ever telling her I liked herbal tea, but I nodded anyway. "That's thoughtful of you." As she busied herself in the kitchen, I settled into my usual spot at the small dining table by the window. From here I could see Mrs. Patterson's house across the street, where she'd lived for 30 years, and the Hendersons' place next door with their perfect lawn that made mine look like a battlefield. Normal suburban life continuing around me, oblivious to the strange tension I'd been feeling lately during Sarah's visits. "Dad, you haven't been taking your medications regularly, have you?" Sarah's voice carried that tone she used when she was trying not to lecture me. She was holding my pill organizer, the one with the days of the week printed on each compartment. "I take what I need when I need it," I said, which wasn't entirely true, but close enough. "The doctor said consistency is important, your heart medication especially." She began separating pills into the compartments with the precision of a pharmacist. "Promise me you'll try to stick to the schedule." I watched her work, her fingers quick and efficient. Sarah had always been meticulous, even as a child. Margaret used to joke that Sarah organized her crayons by color before she was 5 years old. It was a family trait she definitely didn't inherit from me. "Would you like some water?" she asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "You should stay hydrated, especially with your medications." "Sure, sweetheart." I heard the tap running, the familiar sound of water filling glasses. Sarah returned with 2 identical glasses, setting one in front of me and keeping the other for herself. The water was cold, fresh from the filter Margaret had insisted we install 3 years ago. "Tastes better," she'd said, though water was water to me. "So tell me about work," I said, taking a sip. "Still crunching those numbers?" Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Same old spreadsheets, same old meetings. Nothing as interesting as your stories about the hardware store." I'd owned Patterson's Hardware for 35 years before retiring. Sold it to a chain store that gutted everything that made it special, but that was progress, I supposed. Sarah had heard all my stories a dozen times, but she always listened politely. Another one of her respectful qualities. We talked about ordinary things, the weather turning colder, the neighbors, her job. But something felt different today. Sarah seemed distracted, glancing at her watch more often than usual, fidgeting with her phone. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. That's when I noticed her looking at my glass. It was subtle, the way her eyes flicked toward my water and then away again. Most people wouldn't have caught it, but I'd spent 72 years watching people learning their tells. In the hardware business, you had to know when someone was trying to return stolen goods or when they were lying about a warranty claim. You developed instincts. Sarah's instincts were telling her to watch my glass, and that made me curious. I set the glass down without drinking more and watched her reaction. Relief? Disappointment? It was hard to tell, but there was definitely a reaction. "I should probably use the bathroom," I announced, standing slowly. My joints protested, as they always did, but I managed to keep the grimace off my face. "Of course, Dad, take your time." As I walked toward the hallway, I caught something in my peripheral vision. Sarah's hand, quick as a snake, reaching across the table. When I glanced back from the doorway, she was sitting normally, but our glasses had changed positions. Mine was now where hers had been, and hers was where mine had been. In the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror. The face looking back was older than I felt inside, with deep lines around the eyes and grey stubble I'd forgotten to shave. But the eyes were sharp, alert, and they'd seen what they'd seen. Why would Sarah switch our glasses? The possibilities that came to mind weren't pleasant. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe my old brain was playing tricks on me. But Margaret used to say that just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. She'd read that in a book somewhere and thought it was hilarious. When I returned to the kitchen, Sarah was standing by the sink, looking out the window at nothing in particular. My glass, or what I now suspected was originally her glass, sat on the table where I'd left it. The water level looked the same, but appearances could be deceiving. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked. "Of course, just thinking about work." She turned back to me with that smile that didn't quite work. "You should finish your water, Dad. It's important to stay hydrated." I sat down and picked up the glass, bringing it halfway to my lips before stopping. "You know what? I think I'd like some of that herbal tea instead. Would you mind making me a cup?" Sarah's face went through a series of micro-expressions: surprise, frustration, something else I couldn't identify. "Are you sure? You barely touched your water." "I'm sure. The tea sounds nice." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course. Let me put the kettle on." While Sarah busied herself with the tea preparations, I made my decision. If she wanted to watch me drink, she was going to get a show. I picked up the glass and made a production of taking a long, deep drink, making sure she could see me swallowing. The water tasted normal, no strange flavors, no unusual aftertaste, but that didn't mean anything. I'd heard enough crime shows to know that some things were tasteless. "There," I said, setting the empty glass down with a satisfied sigh. "Happy now?" Sarah turned from the stove, and for just a moment, I saw something in her face that chilled me. Satisfaction? Relief? Guilt? Before I could analyze it further, she was smiling again. "I'm always happy when you take care of yourself, Dad." The kettle began to whistle, a sharp sound that seemed to cut through the suddenly thick air in the kitchen. Sarah poured the hot water over the tea bag, the steam rising between us like a barrier. I watched her hands, steady and sure, and wondered what those hands had been doing while I was in the bathroom. "Here you go," she said, setting the cup in front of me. "Chamomile. It'll help you relax." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup and studied my daughter's face. Really studied it. The woman sitting across from me was someone I'd raised, someone I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework, and walked down the aisle at her wedding 5 years ago. But looking at her now, I realized there were depths to Sarah I'd never explored, depths that maybe I should have paid more attention to. "Sarah," I said carefully, "is there something you want to tell me?" "What do you mean? You seem different today. Nervous, maybe." She laughed, but it sounded forced. "I'm not nervous, Dad. I'm concerned about you. You're living alone in this big house. You're not taking your medications properly, and I worry about what might happen if you have a medical emergency and no one's here to help." It was a reasonable concern, one we'd discussed before, but something about the way she said it now, the timing of it right after the glass switching incident, made it sound less like concern and more like preparation. "I appreciate your worry, sweetheart, but I'm managing fine." "Are you though?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgent tone. "Dad, I love you and I want what's best for you. There are nice facilities, places where you'd have company, professional care, activities, facilities. I set the teacup down harder than necessary. You mean nursing homes? I mean places where you'd be safe and cared for by people who know how to help seniors with health issues. We'd had this conversation before, but never with this intensity. Never right after she'd switched our water glasses. The pieces were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see, but couldn't ignore. I took another sip of the tea, mainly to give myself time to think. If Sarah was trying to what? Drug me? Poison me? The idea seemed insane, but the evidence was hard to dismiss. The switched glasses, her insistence that I drink the water, her sudden push for nursing home placement. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Of course, Dad, always. Did you put something in that water? The question hung in the air between us like a live wire. Sarah's face went through another series of changes. Shock, indignation, hurt, and finally something that looked like resignation. Dad, I don't know what you're talking about. Why would you even ask such a thing? But her voice was different now, defensive, and she was looking everywhere except directly at me. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting, and walked to the kitchen sink. The glass I'd drunk from was still there, along with its twin. On impulse, I picked up what I believed was originally Sarah's glass and held it out to her. Then you won't mind finishing this water. It's the same as what I just drank, right? Sarah stared at the glass like it was a snake. Dad, this is ridiculous. I'm not going to participate in some paranoid game. It's not a game, Sarah. It's a simple request. You're always telling me to stay hydrated. Practice what you preach. I don't want any water right now. Why not? The silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. Outside, I could hear Mrs. Patterson's dog barking, the sound of a lawnmower in the distance, normal suburban sounds that seemed to come from another world. In this kitchen, in this moment, nothing felt normal anymore. Finally, Sarah sighed and reached for the glass. Fine, Dad. If it'll make you feel better about whatever conspiracy theory you've concocted, I'll drink the damn water. She raised the glass to her lips and I watched her face carefully, watched as she hesitated just slightly before tilting the glass, watched as she took a small sip, then another, watched as she set the glass down with what looked like relief. There, happy now? I was about to respond when Sarah's expression changed. Her eyes widened slightly, and she put a hand to her stomach. Then her hand went to her throat. Sarah, you okay? She tried to say something, but only a croaking sound came out. Her face was going pale, and her hand was gripping the edge of the table. Sarah. She looked at me with eyes full of shock and something else. Fear. Then she was sliding off her chair, her legs apparently unable to support her weight. I reached for her, but my own reflexes were too slow, and she hit the floor with a sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. My daughter lay on my kitchen floor, convulsing slightly, her eyes rolling back in her head, and I knew, with a certainty that cut through me like a blade, that whatever had been in that water was meant for me. Time slowed to a crawl as I stared at my daughter's motionless body on the kitchen floor. Sarah's breathing was shallow, her face pale as paper, and a small trickle of saliva ran from the corner of her mouth. My hands shook as I knelt beside her, my arthritic knees screaming in protest against the cold linoleum. Sarah, can you hear me? My voice sounded foreign in my own ears, cracked and desperate. I'd never heard myself sound so afraid. She didn't respond, but her eyelids fluttered slightly. Still alive. Thank God. Still alive. But for how long? I had no idea what she'd put in that water, what she'd intended for me, or how much time I had before whatever it was did permanent damage to her. My first instinct was to call 911, but something held me back. If paramedics came, if this became official, there would be questions. Questions about why my daughter had poisoned water intended for me. Questions about our family, our finances, our relationship. Questions I wasn't sure I was ready to answer until I understood what was really happening here. Instead, I struggled to my feet and grabbed the phone book from the junk drawer. Yes, I still kept a phone book, much to Sarah's annual amusement. My fingers, clumsy with panic, found Dr. Peterson's number. He'd been our family physician for 20 years, had delivered both my grandchildren, had held Margaret's hand during her final moments. If anyone would help without immediately involving the authorities, it would be him. Peterson Medical, this is Jenny. Jenny, it's Harold Patterson. I need to speak to Dr. Peterson immediately. It's an emergency. Mr. Patterson, is everything all right? Are you having chest pains again? It's not me, it's my daughter Sarah. She's unconscious and I think she may have been poisoned. There was a pause that felt like an eternity. Poisoned. Mr. Patterson, you really should call. Please, Jenny, just get Dr. Peterson on the line. I'll explain everything to him. Another pause, then hold music that sounded absurdly cheerful given the circumstances. I kept one eye on Sarah while I waited, watching for any change in her condition. Her breathing seemed stable, but she was completely unresponsive. Harold, what's going on? Dr. Peterson's voice was calm but urgent. Bill, I need you to come to my house right now. Sarah is unconscious on my kitchen floor, and I have reason to believe she ingested something toxic. Harold, if Sarah is unconscious, you need to call 911 immediately. Get her to a hospital. Bill, please, just listen to me for a moment. I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. I think Sarah put something in my water intending for me to drink it, but through a series of circumstances, she ended up drinking it instead. If I call 911, they're going to want to know why my daughter was trying to poison me, and I don't have those answers yet. Silence on the other end. Then, Harold, what you're describing is attempted murder. I know what I'm describing, Bill, and that's exactly why I need your help before we involve anyone else. Can you come over? Can you examine her and tell me how serious this is? Another long pause. Dr. Peterson was weighing his medical ethics against decades of friendship, and I held my breath, waiting for his decision. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't move her, don't give her anything to eat or drink, and if her condition changes at all, if her breathing becomes labored or she starts vomiting, call 911 immediately. Thank you, Bill. Harold, this conversation never happened until we know more about what we're dealing with. The line went dead, and I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Help was coming, but I had 15 minutes to try to understand what my daughter had done to me. 15 minutes to search for answers I wasn't sure I wanted to find. Sarah's purse sat on the counter where she'd left it when she arrived, a brown leather bag I'd given her for her birthday 2 years ago. I'd never gone through my daughter's purse before. It felt like a violation of privacy that went against everything I'd been taught about respecting other people's personal belongings, but she'd tried to poison me. That thought gave me the strength to unzip the bag and peer inside. What I found there made my blood run cold. On top, seemingly placed for easy access, was a small brown medicine bottle with no label. I held it up to the light, examining the white powder inside. There wasn't much left, maybe a quarter of the bottle, enough for several doses of whatever it was. Beneath that, a folded piece of paper with my name written on the outside in Sarah's neat handwriting. With trembling fingers, I unfolded it and began to read. Dad, if you're reading this, it means my plan didn't work the way I hoped it would. I want you to know that I love you, and everything I've done has been because I love you and want what's best for you. The medication in the bottle is a sedative, nothing that would hurt you permanently, just something to make you drowsy and compliant. My plan was to give you a small dose, then call Dr. Peterson and tell him you'd had some kind of episode. With your medical history and your age, he'd recommend immediate hospitalization for observation. From there, it would be easy to have you declared incompetent. The lawyer I've been working with says that with your emphysema, your isolation, and a documented episode of confusion or disorientation, we could get guardianship within a few weeks. I know this sounds terrible, but Dad, you're not safe living alone anymore. You forget to take your medications, you barely eat, and last month Mrs. Patterson called me because she was worried about you. She said she hadn't seen you for 3 days and your newspapers were piling up. When I came over, you were so weak, you could barely stand. I know you'd never agree to assisted living voluntarily. You're too proud, too stubborn, but I can't watch you slowly kill yourself in this house, surrounded by memories of Mom. You deserve to be somewhere safe, somewhere with people who can take care of you properly. The Willowbrook facility has an opening next month. It's expensive, but selling this house and liquidating your savings will cover the first year, maybe 2. After that, we'll figure something out. I'm sorry I couldn't find another way to make you see reason. I'm sorry I had to deceive you. But I'm not sorry for trying to save your life. I love you, Sarah. I read the letter twice, then a third time, each reading making me angrier and more heartbroken. My daughter, my careful, respectful daughter, had been planning to drug me, have me declared incompetent, and ship me off to a nursing home. All for my own good, of course. But what made it even worse was the realization that some of what she'd written was true. I had been having trouble keeping up with things lately. I did sometimes forget my medications. And there had been that incident with Mrs. Patterson, though I'd told myself it was just a particularly bad day. Still, none of that gave Sarah the right to make decisions about my life without consulting me. None of that justified deception and drugging me like some kind of disobedient animal. I folded the letter and put it in my shirt pocket, then continued searching through her purse. I found business cards for lawyers, brochures for 3 different senior living facilities, and a manila folder containing copies of my medical records Sarah had no legal right to possess. At the bottom of the folder was something that made my hands shake with rage, a power of attorney document, already filled out and notarized, granting Sarah complete control over my finances and medical decisions. All it needed was my signature, or a court order declaring me incompetent to refuse signing it. The plan was more elaborate than I'd imagined. Sarah hadn't just decided to drug me on a whim. She'd been working on this for months, maybe longer. She'd consulted lawyers, researched facilities, obtained my medical records illegally, and prepared all the paperwork needed to take control of my life. And she'd done it all while visiting me twice a week, bringing me groceries, asking about my health, pretending to be the devoted daughter. A soft moan from the floor interrupted my discovery. Sarah's eyes were open, unfocused but conscious. She tried to say something, but her words were slurred and incomprehensible. I knelt beside her again, and when her eyes finally focused on my face, I saw recognition dawn, then fear. "Don't try to talk yet," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Dr. Peterson is on his way." Sarah tried to sit up, but I gently pushed her back down. "Stay still. You need to let whatever you put in that water work its way out of your system." Her eyes widened, and she managed to whisper, You know? I know everything, Sarah. I found your letter, I found the sedative, I found your whole damn plan." Tears began running down her cheeks, but I felt no sympathy for her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I also found the power of attorney papers, the nursing home brochures and the copies of my medical records that you had no right to obtain. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Did you really think I was so far gone that I wouldn't notice you switching our glasses? Did you think I was already too senile to figure out what you were doing? Dad, please." Her voice was stronger now, though still shaky. "Let me explain." "Oh, I think your letter explained everything quite clearly. You've been planning to have me declared incompetent so you can warehouse me in some facility and sell my house. All for my own good, of course." The doorbell rang. Dr. Peterson, right on time. I stood up, my knees protesting again, and looked down at my daughter. "Here's what's going to happen, Sarah. Dr. Peterson is going to examine you and make sure you're going to be okay. Then you're going to go home and think very carefully about what you've done. And tomorrow, you and I are going to have a long conversation about respect, trust, and what it really means to love someone." I started toward the front door, then stopped and looked back at her. "And if you ever, and I mean ever, try anything like this again, I'll have you arrested for attempted poisoning and elder abuse. Daughter or not, blood relation or not, I will not tolerate being treated like a child or an invalid by anyone." The doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. "Now let's get you taken care of," I said, heading for the door. "Because despite everything you've done, you're still my daughter and I still love you." "But Sarah," I paused with my hand on the doorknob, "that love doesn't make me stupid, and it sure as hell doesn't make me helpless." As I opened the door to let Dr. Peterson in, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in the last hour. My daughter had tried to take control of my life because she thought I was too weak and confused to take care of myself. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. If this story is touching something deep inside you, I'd love to know from which city or country you're following Harold's journey. Your support from around the world means everything. Dr. Bill Peterson stood in my doorway looking exactly as he had for the past 20 years. Slightly disheveled grey hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of calm presence that made you believe everything would be okay, even when it clearly wasn't. He carried his black medical bag, the same one he'd brought when Margaret had her stroke, when Danny broke his arm falling out of the oak tree in our backyard, when Sarah had pneumonia as a teenager. "Where is she?" he asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Kitchen floor. She's conscious now, but barely." Bill followed me through the house, his practiced eye taking in details I probably didn't even notice. When he saw Sarah lying on the linoleum, still pale but more alert than she'd been 10 minutes ago, he immediately knelt beside her and began his examination. "Sarah, can you hear me? It's Dr. Peterson." "Bill?" Sarah's voice was weak but clearer than before. What happened?" "That's what we're trying to figure out, sweetheart. Can you tell me how you're feeling? Any nausea, dizziness, chest pain?" I watched from the doorway as Bill took her pulse, checked her pupils, listened to her heart. The same routine I'd seen him perform countless times, but never under circumstances like these. Never with the knowledge that my daughter had been trying to drug me. "I feel foggy, like I can't think straight and my mouth is so dry." Sarah tried to sit up, but Bill gently pushed her back down. "Stay horizontal for now. Harold, help me get her onto the couch. She'll be more comfortable there." Together, we managed to get Sarah moved to the living room sofa. She was unsteady on her feet, leaning heavily on both of us, but she could walk. That seemed like a good sign, though I was no medical expert. Once Sarah was settled with a pillow behind her head, Bill turned to me with the expression I'd come to recognize over the years. It was the look he got when he was about to ask questions that wouldn't have easy answers. "Harold, I need you to tell me exactly what happened here. Start from the beginning." I glanced at Sarah, who was watching me with wide, fearful eyes. Part of me wanted to protect her, to come up with some story that would save us both from the ugly truth. But another part of me, the part that had been violated and betrayed, wanted everything out in the open. Sarah put something in my water, a sedative according to the letter she left in her purse. She switched our glasses when I went to the bathroom, but I noticed and tricked her into drinking from the wrong glass. Bill's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. "You have evidence of this?" I pulled Sarah's letter from my shirt pocket and handed it to him. "She confessed to everything. Read it yourself." As Bill read, his face grew increasingly grim. Sarah made a small whimpering sound and covered her face with her hands. "Sarah," Bill said quietly, folding the letter, "is this true? Did you drug your father's water?" "I wasn't trying to hurt him," Sarah said through her fingers. "I was trying to help him. He's not taking care of himself, Bill. He's getting worse and he won't admit it. I thought if I could just get him to a hospital, get him evaluated properly, by drugging him without his consent." Bill's voice carried a sharp edge I'd rarely heard from him. "Sarah, what you're describing is assault. It's also incredibly dangerous. Do you have any idea what that sedative could have done to someone with your father's heart condition and emphysema?" Sarah lowered her hands, tears streaming down her face. "I researched it. I looked up the dosage, the contraindications. I was careful." "You researched it?" Bill stood up, his calm demeanor cracking. "You researched how to drug your 72-year-old father with multiple health conditions? Sarah, where did you even get sedatives?" The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah looked like she was debating whether to answer, and I found myself genuinely curious about this detail. How does a corporate accountant get her hands on unmarked sedatives? "A friend," she finally whispered. "Someone I know who works in veterinary medicine. They use these for animals who need to be calmed during transport." "Veterinary sedatives?" Bill's voice rose in disbelief. "Sarah, you gave your father veterinary medication? It's the same basic compound they use for humans, just different packaging." "That is not the point." Bill was fully angry now, his professional composure completely gone. "The point is that you obtained controlled substances illegally, planned to administer them without consent, and had no idea how they might interact with his other medications or health conditions. You could have killed him." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. In all my anger about Sarah's betrayal, I hadn't fully considered how dangerous her plan actually was. I'd been focused on the violation of trust, the attempt to control my life. But Bill was right. She could have killed me. "Harold," Bill continued, "I need to examine you too. If you handled that glass, if any of the substance got on your hands or lips." For the next 20 minutes, Bill put me through the same examination he'd given Sarah. Blood pressure, heart rate, reflexes, cognitive tests. I felt fine, but I submitted to his scrutiny without complaint. When he was finished, he sat back with a slight sigh of relief. "You seem unaffected, which suggests you didn't ingest any of the sedative. But Harold, we need to talk about what Sarah wrote in that letter. Some of her concerns about your health are valid." I finished for him. "I know, Bill, I'm not stupid and I'm not completely in denial. I've been struggling with some things lately." Sarah looked up hopefully, as if my admission might somehow excuse what she'd done. "But struggling doesn't mean I'm incompetent," I continued. "It doesn't mean I've lost the right to make my own decisions, even if those decisions aren't the ones my daughter would prefer." Bill nodded slowly. "Harold, I've been your doctor for 20 years. I've seen you at your strongest and at some of your lowest points. And while it's true that you've been having some difficulties since Margaret died, I've never seen anything that would suggest you lack the mental capacity to manage your own affairs. But the medication compliance," Sarah started, "is something we can work on," Bill interrupted. "There are pill organizers, reminder systems, home health aides if necessary. There are dozens of solutions that don't require stripping someone of their autonomy." He turned back to me. "Harold, I do think you might benefit from some additional support. Not because you're incompetent, but because everyone needs help sometimes, especially when dealing with grief and chronic health conditions." I considered this. It was reasonable, non-threatening. the kind of suggestion I might actually be willing to consider, unlike Sarah's nursing home scheme. What kind of support? A home health aide who could come in a couple times a week, help with medication management, light housekeeping, meal preparation, someone to check on you and provide companionship. It would allow you to stay in your own home while addressing Sarah's legitimate concerns about your welfare. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a compromise I could live with. More importantly, it was a solution that treated me like an adult, capable of making informed decisions about my own life. I could consider that, I said. Sarah sat up straighter on the couch. Dad, that's all I wanted. I just wanted to know you were safe and taken care of. No, Sarah. What you wanted was control. If you'd wanted me to be safe and taken care of, you would have talked to me about your concerns. You would have brought me options and asked for my input. You wouldn't have plotted to drug me and have me declared incompetent. The hurt in her eyes was genuine, but I wasn't ready to feel sorry for her yet. Bill cleared his throat. There's another matter we need to discuss. Sarah, what you did today was illegal. Harold would be within his rights to file charges against you. Sarah went pale again. Dad, please, I know I handled this wrong, but I was trying to help. Please don't have me arrested. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was 45 years old, successful in her career, married to a good man, mother to 2 children I adored. She was also someone who had been willing to drug her own father and have him institutionalized rather than have an honest conversation about her concerns. I'm not going to have you arrested, Sarah, but I am going to require some changes. What kind of changes? First, you're going to return all of my medical records to Dr. Peterson. You had no right to obtain them, and I want them back in proper hands. Sarah nodded quickly. Second, you're going to destroy that power of attorney document and any other legal paperwork you've prepared without my knowledge. Another nod. Third, if you want to continue being part of my life, we're going to start having honest conversations. No more treating me like a child who can't handle the truth. If you're worried about something, you tell me directly. If you think I need help with something, you ask me how I'd like to handle it. You don't make plans behind my back. I can do that, Dad. I promise. And fourth, I continued, you're going to apologize to Dr. Peterson for putting him in this position and for wasting his time with your deception. Sarah turned to Bill. I'm sorry, Bill. I'm so sorry. I know what I did was wrong, and I'm grateful that you came to help instead of just calling the police. Bill accepted her apology with a curt nod, but his expression remained stern. Sarah, I've known you since you were a child, and this behavior is completely unlike you. I'm concerned that your grief over your mother's death, combined with anxiety about your father's health, may have led you to make some very poor decisions. I think you're right, Sarah said quietly. I haven't been sleeping well. I've been obsessing over worst-case scenarios, and I convinced myself that drastic action was justified. I'd like to recommend that you speak with someone about these feelings, grief counseling or perhaps therapy, to help you process your anxiety about your father's health. Sarah looked surprised by the suggestion, but not resistant to it. You think I need therapy? I think you need support in finding healthier ways to express your concern for your father. What you did today was dangerous and illegal, but I don't think it came from a place of malice. I think it came from a place of fear and unprocessed grief. I hadn't considered that angle, that Sarah's actions might be as much about her inability to cope with losing Margaret as they were about concerns over my health. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it did provide some context that made her behavior slightly more understandable. I'll think about it, Sarah said. You'll do more than think about it, I said firmly. You'll make an appointment this week. That's not a request, Sarah. That's a condition of us moving forward. She nodded, and for the first time since she'd collapsed on my kitchen floor, I felt like I was looking at my real daughter instead of the stranger who had been planning to control my life. But trust once broken isn't easily repaired, and I had a feeling it was going to be a long time before I could look at Sarah without remembering what she'd been willing to do to me. Tell me, friends from around the world, have you ever had to confront a family member about betraying your trust? From which corner of the earth are you watching this unfold? 3 days passed before Sarah called. 3 days during which I replayed the events in my kitchen over and over, each time finding new layers of betrayal I'd initially missed. The veterinary sedatives, the forged medical records, the months of planning while she sat at my dining table, drinking my coffee, pretending to care about my stories from the hardware store. But what haunted me most wasn't the deception itself. It was how close she'd come to succeeding. How easily I might have slipped into that drugged stupor, been declared incompetent by some court-appointed psychiatrist who'd never met me, and found myself warehoused in one of those facilities where old people go to wait for death. When the phone finally rang Wednesday evening, I almost didn't answer it. "Dad?" Sarah's voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. Could we talk? In person? I suppose we need to. Could I come over? Or would you prefer to meet somewhere neutral?" The question surprised me. The old Sarah would have simply announced she was coming over, assuming her presence was welcome. This new Sarah, chastened by consequences, was asking permission. "Come here," I said, 7 o'clock. She arrived precisely on time, carrying a manila folder and looking like she'd aged 5 years in 3 days. Her usual immaculate appearance was disheveled, hair pulled back carelessly, minimal makeup, clothes that looked like she'd slept in them. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "Sit down, Sarah, we have a lot to discuss." She chose the chair across from me rather than the couch, maintaining distance, I noted. The manila folder sat on her lap like a shield. "I brought everything," she said, opening the folder. "All your medical records, copies of everything I had. And I destroyed the power of attorney papers, burned them in my fireplace last night." She handed me a stack of papers, and I recognized my own medical history staring back at me. Detailed reports from Dr. Peterson, specialists' evaluations, even notes from Margaret's final hospitalization that mentioned my emotional state during her illness. "How did you get these?" Sarah's face flushed red. "I told Dr. Peterson's office that you'd asked me to pick up your records for insurance purposes. Jenny didn't question it. She's known me for years." Another violation of trust, this one involving poor Jenny, who'd simply been trying to help a familiar face. I made a mental note to speak with Dr. Peterson about tightening his office procedures. And the lawyer? The nursing home consultations? When did all of this planning begin? Sarah took a shaky breath. "About 6 months ago, right after that incident Mrs. Patterson mentioned, when you didn't answer your door for 3 days. I came over that Tuesday, and you were so weak, Dad. You hadn't eaten anything but crackers for days, you'd run out of your heart medication, and you didn't even remember what day it was." I did remember that episode, though I'd tried to forget it. It had been during one of my worst periods after Margaret's death, when getting out of bed felt impossible and taking care of basic needs seemed pointless. I was grieving, Sarah. People grieve differently. I know that now. But at the time, all I could think about was what would have happened if Mrs. Patterson hadn't called me. What if you'd had a heart attack that week? What if you'd fallen and couldn't get up? You could have died alone in this house and no one would have found you for days. Her voice broke on the last words, and I saw genuine terror in her eyes. Not just concern or frustration, actual paralyzing fear. "So you decided to take control of my life. I decided to make sure you'd be safe. Yes, I went about it completely wrong, but Dad, I was so scared. Every night I'd lie awake imagining worst-case scenarios. Every time you didn't answer the phone immediately, I'd panic. I convinced myself that you were getting worse, that it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened." She pulled a tissue from her purse and wiped her eyes. "The lawyer was actually the one who suggested the guardianship route. He said that in cases where elderly parents refuse necessary care, sometimes family members have to take legal action for the person's own protection. And you didn't think to discuss any of this with me?" I tried. "Remember last Christmas when I brought up the idea of you moving to a smaller place? You shut down the conversation completely. You said you'd rather die than leave this house, and you meant it. I could see it in your face." She wasn't wrong about that. I had shut down that conversation, and several others like it. But there was a difference between not wanting to move and being incapable of making rational decisions about my own life. "Sarah, there's something you need to understand. I may be old, I may be sick, and I may not always make the choices you'd prefer, but I'm still a human being with the right to determine my own future, even if that future includes some risks. But what if I fall and break a hip? What if I have another episode where I don't take care of myself properly? What if I die alone in this house?" I leaned forward, meeting her eyes directly. "Those are all possibilities, Sarah, but they're my possibilities to face. Taking away my right to make those choices doesn't protect me. It just makes you feel better." Sarah was crying openly now. "I can't lose you too, Dad. I can't handle losing both of you." And there it was, the real truth beneath all the planning and deception. This wasn't really about my health or my safety. This was about Sarah's inability to cope with the possibility of losing another parent. "Sweetheart," I said more gently, "you're going to lose me eventually. That's how life works. But drugging me and having me declared incompetent won't prevent that loss. It'll just mean you lose the real me while keeping alive some version of me that you can control. I know that now. Dr. Peterson helped me see God, Dad, What I almost did to you, what I was willing to do." She covered her face with her hands. "I made an appointment with a grief counselor. First session is tomorrow." "Good. That's a start." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of everything that had happened settling between us. Outside, I could hear the evening sounds of our neighborhood, kids playing in yards, lawnmowers, the distant hum of traffic. Normal life continuing around us, while we tried to figure out how to rebuild something that had been fundamentally broken. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "That day when you switched the glasses, did you really know what I was planning, or were you just suspicious?" I considered the question carefully. "I was suspicious. The way you kept looking at my glass, the way you acted when I didn't drink right away. My instincts told me something was wrong, but I didn't know the full scope of it until I found your letter. And if you hadn't switched the glasses, if I had succeeded, you mean if you'd successfully drugged me?" She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "I suppose I would have gotten drowsy. You would have called Dr. Peterson or 911, and I would have ended up in the hospital for evaluation. From there, depending on how committed you were to your plan, I might have found myself facing competency hearings. Would you have fought it? With everything I had? But Sarah, you need to understand. At 72, with my health issues, fighting a guardianship proceeding would have been an uphill battle, especially with a daughter presenting evidence of confusion, self-neglect and medication non-compliance. You might very well have succeeded." The horror on her face told me she was finally grasping the full implications of what she'd set in motion. "I could have stolen your entire life." "Yes, you could have. How can you even stand to look at me?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been wrestling with for 3 days. How do you forgive someone for attempting something so fundamentally violating? How do you trust again after such a complete betrayal? "Because you're my daughter," I said finally. "Because I raised you and I know the person you really are underneath all this fear and misguided love. Because I believe people can learn from their mistakes and do better. But," I smiled slightly at how well she knew me, "but trust isn't automatic, Sarah. You violated something fundamental between us, and rebuilding that is going to take time. A lot of time. What do I need to do? Follow through on the therapy. Be honest with me about your concerns instead of plotting behind my back. And accept that I'm going to make some changes to protect myself." "What kind of changes?" "I'm going to take Dr. Peterson's advice about the home health aide. Not because you were right about me being incompetent, but because having some support will give both of us peace of mind." Sarah nodded eagerly. "That sounds reasonable." "I'm also going to update my will and make sure my legal affairs are in order. Not because I'm planning to die anytime soon, but because this situation showed me how vulnerable I could be if something happened to me. Dad, I would never—" "You already did, Sarah. Maybe not with malicious intent, but you already proved you're willing to override my wishes when you think you know better. I need legal protections in place." The pain in her eyes was clear, but she nodded acceptance. "And one more thing. We're going to have regular family meetings. You, me, and Dr. Peterson if necessary. If you have concerns about my health or safety, we'll address them openly. No more secrets, no more plotting, no more treating me like I'm too fragile to handle difficult conversations. I can do that, all of it. Sarah, I need you to understand something. I love you. I will always love you. But love doesn't mean blind trust. And it doesn't mean pretending this didn't happen. What you did was wrong, and it's going to take a long time for me to feel secure with you again. I understand. Do you? Because part of me wonders if you're just saying what you think I want to hear. Part of me wonders if 6 months from now, when I have another bad day, or forget to take my medication, you'll decide that desperate measures are justified again." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her really thinking about the question. "I don't know," she said finally. "I wish I could promise you that I'll never be tempted to interfere in your life again, but I don't know if that's a promise I can keep. What I can promise is that I'll be in therapy, working on understanding why I thought what I did was acceptable. And I can promise that I'll talk to you first, no matter how scared I get." It wasn't the absolute assurance I might have preferred, but it was honest. And honesty, even uncomfortable honesty, felt like progress. "That's a start," I said. As Sarah gathered her things to leave, she paused at the door. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd raised who'd made such a terrible mistake out of love and fear, and felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly. That would come later, if it came at all, but something like hope. "I don't know, Sarah, but we're going to try." After she left, I sat in my quiet house and thought about second chances, about the difference between love and control, and about the long road ahead of us. Outside, Mrs. Patterson's dog was barking again, and somewhere down the street, someone was grilling dinner. Life was going on, messy and complicated and uncertain, just the way it should be. 6 weeks later, I was standing in my kitchen watching Maria organize my medications when Sarah arrived for our scheduled family meeting. These weekly check-ins had become routine since our confrontation, awkward at first, but gradually more natural as we learned to communicate honestly. Maria Gonzalez was the home health aide Dr. Peterson had recommended, a 60-year-old former nurse who treated me like a capable adult rather than an invalid. She came 3 times a week, helped with medication management and light housekeeping, and had become something of a friend. More importantly, her presence seemed to ease Sarah's anxiety about my living situation. "Good morning, Mr. Harold," Sarah said, setting down a bag of groceries. Her visit still included bringing me food, but now she asked what I wanted instead of assuming I needed expensive organic vegetables. "Morning, sweetheart. How's the therapy going?" This question had become part of our weekly ritual. Sarah's grief counseling was progressing well, and she'd started to understand how her fear of losing me had driven her to such desperate measures. "Dr. Martinez thinks I'm making progress. We talked about control this week, how trying to control outcomes doesn't actually make them safer, just makes me feel temporarily less anxious." Maria smiled approvingly. "Very wise, your daughter is learning." I poured coffee for all 3 of us, another small ritual that made these meetings feel less like medical consultations and more like family time. "I have some news," Sarah said, settling into her usual chair. "Tom and I are thinking about moving closer, maybe within a few miles instead of across town." This was unexpected. Sarah and her husband lived about 30 minutes away, close enough for regular visits, but far enough to maintain independence. "Why? Not to hover," she added quickly, reading my expression. "But being closer would make it easier for regular visits without feeling like major expeditions, and the kids could see you more often." The mention of my grandchildren, 8-year-old Emma and 10-year-old Jake, softened something in my chest. I'd seen them only sporadically since Margaret's death, partly because of my own withdrawal from family activities. "I'd like that," I admitted. "Where in the world are you watching Harold's journey of healing? I hope families everywhere can learn from our story about love, trust, and second chances." 3 months after that terrible day in my kitchen, I stood at Margaret's grave, holding my granddaughter Emma's small hand. The October afternoon was crisp, leaves crunching under our feet as we placed fresh flowers on the headstone. "Tell me about Grandma again," Emma asked, her 8-year-old voice filled with the curiosity that reminded me so much of Sarah at that age. "She made the best apple pie in Ohio," I said, the same story I'd told dozens of times. "And she always said the secret ingredient was patience." "Dad's getting better at being patient too," Sarah said quietly from beside me. She'd been coming to these monthly cemetery visits since she started therapy, part of her process of working through her grief over losing Margaret. It was true. I was getting better at patience, better at accepting help when I needed it, better at asking for support instead of struggling alone. Maria had become not just a caregiver, but a genuine friend, and her presence had allowed me to maintain my independence while giving Sarah the peace of mind she needed. "Grandpa, are you going to live with us when we move to Maple Street?" Jake asked. At 10, he was old enough to understand that families sometimes needed to make adjustments as people got older. Sarah and Tom had found a house just 15 minutes away, close enough for regular visits, but far enough to maintain healthy boundaries. They'd asked if I wanted to consider moving too, maybe to a smaller place nearby, but I'd declined. This house still felt like home, still held 47 years of memories with Margaret. "No, buddy, I'm going to stay in my house with Maria's help, but you'll be close enough to visit whenever you want. Can I still help you in the garden next spring? I'm counting on it." The truth was, I'd been counting on a lot of things lately. Counting on Sarah's continued progress in therapy, counting on my own ability to accept help gracefully, counting on the possibility that families could survive even devastating betrayals if both sides were willing to do the hard work of rebuilding trust. As we walked back to the cars, Sarah fell into step beside me. "Dad, I need to tell you something." My stomach clenched automatically, a response I still had whenever Sarah said she needed to tell me something. The trauma of her deception hadn't fully healed, might never fully heal. "Dr. Martinez thinks I'm ready to reduce our sessions to once a month instead of weekly." I relaxed. "Good news then. That's progress." "It is. But Dad, I want you to know that even when I'm not in weekly therapy anymore, I'm committed to the work. to being honest with you, to respecting your choices, to dealing with my anxiety in healthier ways. We'd had variations of this conversation before, but something in Sarah's tone was different today, more settled, more genuine. "I believe you," I said, and realized I actually meant it. "Really? Really? Sarah, what you did to me was terrible. It broke something fundamental between us. But watching you these past few months, seeing you take responsibility, seeing you change, seeing you fight for our relationship, that's shown me who you really are underneath the fear." We'd reached my car, where Maria was waiting with a patient smile. She'd driven me to the cemetery because my night vision wasn't what it used to be. Another small accommodation that allowed me to maintain my dignity while staying safe. The person I really am. Someone who loves so fiercely that it sometimes scares you into making bad decisions. Someone who's brave enough to face those bad decisions and work to be better. Someone worth fighting for. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. All of you. Your strength, your stubbornness, your mistakes, and your determination to learn from them." As I watched Sarah drive away with her family, I thought about the strange turns life takes. 6 months ago, I'd been a widower, slowly declining in isolation, while my daughter plotted to control my life out of misguided love. Today, I was still a widower, still dealing with health challenges, but I was surrounded by genuine support and honest relationships. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the deepest truths. Sometimes nearly losing everything teaches you what really matters. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, love finds a way to heal even the deepest wounds.